Every Tuesday night at my house, the big bins that sit outside next to our garage are rolled out to the street. They're about this tall. They are big black cans, plastic squares with lids. One is green and one is blue. The blue holds the recycle. The green holds the trash. They have two little back wheels. They get wheeled out to the curb because on Wednesday, two different trucks come through our neighborhood, one to pick up the recycle and the other pick up the garbage. Now, one of the things that has never happened, right? So the truck comes up, it's got these arms, it picks up that green lidded can and dumps it into a little dumpster that's on the front of the big trash truck, which eventually gets emptied into the back of the truck. It's never happened that when that garbage, those arms dump that can into that dumpster, that instead of the garbage we put in, gold bricks come falling out of that can. It's never happened that when that trash can picks up, bubbles come floating out, or flowers, or butterflies. What comes out is the very garbage that we put in. We put garbage into that can, and when it gets emptied, it's garbage that comes out. Early in my days as an information technology person, we learned this lesson that I think was a statement that comes from the early days of IT. Garbage in, garbage out. Meaning, when you put data into a computer system, if you put in bad data, you're going to get bad data out. And it was a way of saying that we should do the best we can to make sure that the data we put in is accurate so that when we take the data out, it also is accurate. This week I was working with the vendor on ordering something, and I had a quote as to how much it would cost. And when I got the final invoice, it was wrong. There had been two numbers transposed where the bigger number was in front of the smaller number. And so my bill was quite a bit higher than had been quoted. The data that got put into the system was wrong, and so the data that came out of the system was wrong. Garbage went in, and then garbage came out. Today we hear from the 4th chapter of Philippians. We've been in Philippians now for 4 weeks, very much focused on the idea of one, of unity, as Jesus invites us to be one as the church. Paul talks about all the way through this idea of being of one mind and one spirit. But nowhere in that talking about being of one mind does he say that we sit around and just keep talking ourselves into doctrines that we can all agree on. In the 1st chapter, that unity comes from suffering with and for one another. In the 2nd chapter, he invites us into spaces of a oneness of love in the ways that we live and serve and maybe even die with and for one another. And then in the 3rd chapter, he invites us to let go of everything we have understand about ourselves and all of the things that we have done, and to understand that Jesus is calling us forward, calling us into these waters of baptism, this call that we share as the church, and that there's a unity in that. And today, I would argue in this 4th chapter, that Paul is arguing us that unity comes in being one in faith together. We talk about one Lord, one baptism, one faith. He doesn't use that word faith, but he gives us some sort of behaviors and ways of being in the world that really, for me, land in that space of being one faith together. Now, if we start at the end of the passage, I think we might see that Paul understood that garbage in means garbage out. That what we absorb and take in from the world around us, if we take in things that are bad, then maybe what will come out of us will reflect that. He talks about what we should think about and pay attention to. And in that list, he says, pay attention to what is true and what is just, what is honorable, commendable, excellent, praiseworthy. And in that list, right, Paul is encouraging us to look for God in the world and to see what God is up to. But as Paul says that, you know that in his time there were the opposites that were present, right? There were people around him. If you listen to the Psalms, they talk about those that speak falsehoods. It's all through the Psalms, right? So Paul knows that there's people around him that are not truthful. Paul knows that there are people around him who are not just. He lives in the Roman Empire and sees that every day. He no doubt has seen behavior around him that's not commendable and not honorable and not excellent and not praiseworthy. And so Paul is inviting the Philippians and us to look beyond that garbage that is around us and to try to see the things that are of God in the world, so that what we're taking in is the good stuff, that then what comes out of us is also true and just, right? That is honorable and commendable and excellent and praiseworthy. Paul, I think, knows that when we take in garbage, then garbage comes out. And it's not hard to see this in our world as we hear this encouragement to look for what is true and just and commendable and honorable. How much of what we see every day is the opposite of that? How often do we turn on the news or listen to our neighbors or tune into social media and see things that we wouldn't commend, things that we don't think are honorable, questions about what is true and what is just. And as we try to work through those questions together, we find that the tone of our conversations is bitter and mean and disparaging, so that we're surrounded all the time, but what we might call garbage, right? And when we take that garbage in huge amounts every day, how likely is it then that what comes out of us is going to be in that same space? That we take in this bitterness and this meanness and this division, and then somehow we participate in creating it. Garbage in, garbage out. Paul is trying to get us to pay attention to some other things so that what goes in is of God, and then maybe what comes out is of God. But at the same time, we can remember there's a time where Jesus is going along with his disciples and they get accused of eating the wrong things, right? And Jesus, as he is correcting that, says it's not what goes in that defiles, but what comes out. The ways that we speak and act, right? Jesus is inviting us to think about those things, regardless of what it is that we take in. It's almost as if Jesus is saying garbage in does not have to mean garbage out. The world around us can give us all kinds of garbage, but we don't have to pick it up and give it back, right? That we can make some choices along the way. And that reminds me then of one of the other things of computer systems, right? Like data goes in, data comes out. I would bet that most of you at some point have experienced one of those little pop-up windows. When I, in my email program, put together an email and I may say, please see the attached document. When I go to send that email, if I forget the attachment, my email program will pop up a little window that says, you've indicated that you want to attach something, but you didn't. Would you like to continue or not? And if I meant to attach something, I say, oh gosh, no, cancel. And then I attach the attachment and send the email. But sometimes it guesses wrong. I don't actually want to attach anything. And in those cases, I can say, yes, send it. I didn't have an attachment. Similarly, when I'm making a document and I go to close it, if I haven't saved, it will say, you did not save the changes that you made. Would you like to save them? And that gives me an opportunity to think and say, yes, I would, or no, those changes were just something I was testing and I don't want to save those. Often on web pages, we can be in places that are a lot more consequential, right? It can be a question about, did you read all of these terms and conditions before you're going to say yes to this appointment that you're making or this thing that you're signing up and applying for? And that message pops up and says, this is what you're saying yes to. Did you really mean to do that? Yes or no? These pop-up messages are meant to slow us down, cause us to think a little bit about what's happening right in front of us and make a choice that is intentional rather than just, right, accidentally clicking or not thinking about what it is that we're doing. So as Paul is encouraging us to all of these behaviors, right, we don't have pop-up messages that come up in front of us. But as Paul encourages us to be faithful, in today's passage, he gives us a few things that we can look to as behaviors that might be part of that one faith that we share. First, he says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice. Perhaps part of being faithful is that place of living in joy and rejoicing. Second, he talks about being prayerful in all things, right? Not just at our prayer time, but prayerful all the time. But it's not just any old prayer, right? Lift all the prayer up, Paul says, but do it with thanksgiving. So there's rejoicing, praying with thanksgiving. And then Paul says, let yourselves be known by your gentleness. So we now have rejoicing, thanksgiving, and gentleness as three aspects of part of what we may carry as the one faith that we share. Now there's certainly more to it, right? There's generosity and service and relationships that we live into. But in this passage today, it's this rejoicing, this thanksgiving, and this gentleness that Paul calls us into. Now I want you to imagine what it would look like in our lives if we had little pop-up windows as we went through the day. So you're driving down the road, you're a little bit stressed, you're a little bit late for something, and then a car cuts you off. How do you respond to that? Well, let's assume that we're about to say something maybe would regret or make a gesture that we probably shouldn't. And imagine that right before you do that, a little window pops up and says, you're about to make this response. It has no gentleness in it. Would you like to reconsider, or would you like to continue? If that popped up in front of us and maybe there's a little picture of Jesus there, I think that would cause us to pause and say, gosh, maybe that's not how I want to be known in the world. And that quick reaction I was going to make isn't the one I really want to. And so we might say, no, let's not do that, and reconsider that we might be known by our gentleness. Imagine just the ways that we come into different experiences in life where we don't feel rejoicing, right? And we hear a tough day that someone's having or other struggles that we have, and a window could pop up and say, you're about to enter into this time of gossiping and complaining and all kinds of terrible. You can do that, but you could cancel and reconsider what it looks like to rejoice in the Lord and to give thanks for what you have in this day. I think about our social media posts, especially in this time of deep division in our country, and how often people just hit share, 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 or type out long diatribes that are meant to convince people that probably aren't even listening. And what if Facebook popped up a little message that says, you are a person of faith. What you're about to share does not reflect gentleness. It has no rejoicing and no thanksgiving for what is going on in your day. Do you want to continue with the tone that is there, or would you like to cancel and reconsider? And my hope would be that if we really did have these pop-up messages, that it would call us into a more faithful way of living, that we would consider everything we say and everything we do through those lenses of faithfulness. Not just the rejoicing and the thanksgiving and the gentleness, but all of the love and grace and mercy and compassion that Jesus calls us into. The problem is we don't have these little pop-up windows. And if I'm being honest, there are plenty of times where I just click on OK without actually reading the message, right? I just get so used to saying yes, 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 that I don't often pause and really think about what that message is asking me. And sometimes I've said yes to something that I don't know what I said yes to because I didn't really read the message, and it's not a program I maybe use all the time. So that whatever garbage was coming in is the garbage that I spit out, and I haven't had a moment to stop and think about how it is that I'm responding. So Paul invites us to think about good things, not to just take in the garbage, but then if Jesus could give us these pop-up messages for those times we do take in all of that garbage to make sure that what we put out is not that same garbage, but then we can even fail at that. This is where Jesus comes in again. In our neighborhood, the trucks that drive around, there's one truck for recycle and one truck for garbage, right? The recycling gets taken off and made into something new, and the garbage just gets thrown away. I don't think Jesus works in that same way. When he's on the cross, he gathers up all of our human garbage, all of our brokenness, the horrible things we say, the terrible things we do, the division we seem to live in, all of the garbage that we spit out after the garbage that we take in. Jesus gathers all of that up on the cross, but he doesn't throw it away. Through death, right, Jesus comes to this place of resurrection. Later, in other places, Paul talks about Christ being a new creation, right? And in Christ we are a new creation. And so there's this thing that takes human garbage, right? The stuff that we create, and through Jesus, God turns it into something new. And in that newness, then, we're freed to live where we don't have to pick up all the garbage and carry it around. And even when we do and make mistakes, there's forgiveness and grace to carry us along into new spaces. And in that way, I think Jesus turns us in to pop-up windows for our culture. If, as Paul invites us to, we truly could be known by our gentleness, truly known by our rejoicing, truly known by the thanks that we give, we become the windows that pop up in our culture so that as other people are dumping garbage out, they encounter us, and just our presence and the way that we live can be an invitation for them to reconsider and go, gosh, there's some gentleness in this person that's in front of me, and maybe then they respond with gentleness. They see our rejoicing and respond with rejoicing. It doesn't mean there's not terrible things and there's not days that we have that are heavy. It simply means that Jesus comes into even those places and picks us up. The thanksgiving that Paul talks about is actually, the word in Greek is Eucharisto. It's where we get the Eucharist, the thanksgiving of the table. It's where we get a reminder of this body and blood of Jesus that tells us he does not give up on us, that he does indeed recycle what is broken in us and make it into something new and send us out into the world full of grace and hope. May we see those pop-up messages in front of us in these days and weeks ahead and be reminded of the gentleness we are called into, reminded of the grace that we can rejoice in and the gifts that we can be thankful for. And in that, may we then be pop-up windows for our culture that invite us into transformation and new places of being that can bring Jesus' love everywhere we go. Amen.